Hello, everybody. It is 3 p.m. and today I am excited to be talking about the manly man myth. This myth that there is one particular way to be a man, and we are going to be debunking that myth and really exploring how gender socialization harms everyone. It does not only harm women, it does not only harm trans people, it harms men as well. So anyone of any gender identity, gender socialization harms. And we're going to be breaking down what I even mean by that. And so if you are tuning in today, I really appreciate you being here. And this week for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we have really been highlighting men experiencing sexual violence, the prevalence of that. We'll be talking about that today. So please, absolutely, I just want to say, check out our Instagram. Connor, our amazing RVSP intern, did some amazing Instagram lives this week with Sean from the Dallas Area Rape Crisis Center and Emiliano from the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. And those Instagram lives were so great, and just a deeper dive and exploration into also men engaging in this work who are in the anti-violence movement. There is space for everybody within the anti-violence movement. It's just a matter of finding out what that looks like for you. But I really appreciated them going live this week, thought that they did such an amazing job. So definitely go to our Instagram, check that out. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So today I am going to go over our VSP services, of course, pretty briefly, but I think it's always important to do. Then I will be talking about the prevalence of sexual violence among men. We're going to define rape culture and how rigid gender roles perpetuate violence. And then we're going to break down toxic masculinity, define it, then explore what that actually means, and then finally wrap up by acknowledging the barriers to combating toxic masculinity, because it's not something that's easy to stand up against all the time. So why is that? That's what we'll be discussing. So with RVSP, we provide education, advocacy, and support. Education, like what I'm doing right now. Yesterday I gave a presentation for a class, so whenever we get requests for presentations, definitely fulfilling those. We also have passive campaigns, which what I mean by that is campaigns that people will walk by. No one's necessarily out there speaking to somebody, but it's campaigns that you just see. And so during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we had a clothesline project. We also had our red flag campaign. This month, at the beginning of the month, we were in the UC Art Gallery with our Me Too setup. So we really highlighted missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is so important because it's a population that definitely needs to be highlighted when talking about sexual violence. So lots of education. If there's ever any topics that you want to see, please let us know. Our peer educators also do a coffee and convos on our Instagram live. So follow us on Instagram if you don't already. It's at UT Arlington RVSP. And we're always talking about a wide range of topics because we see a wide range of topics that need to be talked about when we're talking about sexual violence. So definitely follow us on Instagram. And then support. So again, I'm a confidential advocate, meaning that if someone comes into my office, I'm not a mandatory reporter to the university to Title IX. I am mandatory towards our Clery Act, of course. That's for campus safety purposes, but I don't have to disclose like personal information or anything. So essentially, if someone comes into the office or reaches out by phone or on Teams, then they are going to be in control. So they are going to have the power to decide how they want to engage with me, how they want to move forward, their next steps for healing. I am going to make sure that they are aware of all of their rights and all of their options, and then they are the expert on their own life. And so they will absolutely decide where they want to go from there, whether that's making a police report, making a Title IX report, not making a report. That's also completely normal and valid. if they just want emotional support. So getting referred to counseling and psychological services, or the Women's Center is one of our awesome community partners for more ongoing counseling, getting access to a medical exam if they need to see their PCP. Like all of those things I can help support a student with, and really just be that listening ear. The biggest piece of support that I want y'all to know is if anyone ever reaches out to our office, they are going to be believed, they're going to be supported, and they are going to know it is not your fault. And especially when it comes to men as well. Why we're providing this presentation, it's so important that we acknowledge that men absolutely can and do experience sexual violence. So we have to acknowledge that in order to work on fixing that problem. And then with advocacy, I always think it's important for students to know I am not only your advocate if you are in my office or I'm directly working with you. We are constantly working to shift towards a nonviolent culture within our campus community, within our community in general. And so what that looks like is being aware of how federal and local policies, campus policies are affecting survivors on our campus, and how can we actually create a campus that loves consent, that sees that as a great thing, that can engage in relationships in a really positive way, engage in conflict in a positive way. So we're constantly working towards how do we actually just help our students move our campus towards a nonviolent culture being the norm. So why today am I providing a presentation on the manly man myth and the importance of debunking it? Well, this is the continuum of sexual violence, and it is from the Washington Coalition of Sexual Assault. I love this continuum because I think it does such a good job highlighting that sexual violence is such an umbrella term. So it can be so many things. And oftentimes people will think about the more severe end of the spectrum: rape, murder, partner rape, date rape. They think about incest, sexual exploitation, so like even blackmailing nude pictures, things like that. But a lot of times people don't think, when they think about sexual violence, of just language and the power of language and how it contributes to a culture of sexual violence, or of gender norms and the power of those and how they contribute to sexual violence. And so when we're talking about this manly man myth, the very narrow definition of what it means to be a man, to assert your power, to be assertive, to be athletic, to have the stamina, drive, hypersexual, always wanting sex. All of those ideas are really harmful. Even the norms of what emotions it's okay to express and which ones are not okay to express, and we'll break that down more later. But rigid gender roles and gender socialization, which essentially means that someone is given the expectation based on their gender that they are assigned with their birth certificate. Someone has societal expectations of how they are supposed to act. So we start getting messages about how we are supposed to act within our gender at such a young age. And I say such a young age, it's already before we're born, right? Before we're born, we see people having gender reveals all of the time. And so gender reveals, you're either blue or you're pink, and your room, blue or pink, your toys, princesses or sharks, dinosaurs, Power Rangers. I'm like not as familiar with the newer toys. And then you go through drive-through lines if you get a kid's meal. Is the toy for a boy or a girl? It's like, so there's this idea that even with toys, that there's an expectation of men should play with this toy, girls should play with this toy. And it's really ridiculous, right? Anyone should be able to like any color, like any toys, speak any way, as long as it's not harmful towards others, and just embrace what it is that they like. And it shouldn't have anything to do with their gender. The idea of gender is a social construct. It is something that we created, and by creating it and giving people these boxes of your gender box as a man is you act this way, your gender box as a woman is you act this way. Giving people those definitions of you need to act within this box. When people fall outside of that, they experience language that is violent, and they can also experience physical acts which are violent. And so we need to debunk the manly man myth. We need to say it's not acceptable to have such narrow definitions of what it means to be a man. And these rigid gender norms are really based in sexism. And men have historically had power over women. So a lot of times when people talk about gender-based violence, you're talking about women being the victims and men being the perpetrators. It can absolutely happen the other way around. It can absolutely impact anyone of any gender identity. So I just think that's really important for y'all to know. So because we need to break gender norms, end gender socialization in order to end sexual violence, that is why we're really highlighting this today. And the sexual abuse and sexual violence that men experience is not uncommon. You'll see different research, different places. This is from 1in6.org that at least 1 in 6 men have been sexually abused or assaulted. You will also see other places say, I think RAINN says 1 in 33. College age men are more likely, 5 times more likely to experience sexual violence than non-college age men. And a lot of that is because when you are going to college, you're trying to find community, you are trying to fit in, to find your sense of belonging. You also have this new autonomy, new exposure to alcohol, drugs, and alcohol and drugs is the #1 date rape drug. So all of those combining factor put college age men as being more vulnerable. And so when we think about men and sexual violence, we really need to be thinking this is not uncommon. If you are in a room with 6 men, assume that one of them has experienced sexual violence. And the more that we can assume that we are around survivors all the time, the more likely we'll be to intervene if we hear someone trivializing a rape joke or making just an inappropriate sexist comment, or if we are around someone that says something like man up or hey bro, you're being a pussy, or if we're around someone that says no homo. By the end of this presentation, I hope that you will be able to identify if we let that language slide, that contributes more towards a culture of violence. And so we just have to start holding people accountable when they say things like that. And when we're talking about men and sexual violence, it's important to realize that there's the manly man myth, and there's also a lot of other myths about men and sexual violence in particular. One of those is that boys can't be sexually abused. So there's this idea that, again, women are victims, men are perpetrators, so men can't be sexually abused. And there's an idea that the reason this is because a man should be able to defend himself because they are powerful, they are assertive, which is going back into that manly man myth. But we can never predict how we are going to respond if we are in a situation where we are feeling like we don't have power and control, where we are feeling helpless. If someone is experiencing coercion, they can definitely be scared and it can cause them to have a trauma reaction. So there's no way that we can predict how we are going to respond to sexual violence unless we are in that moment. So boys absolutely can and are sexually abused. Just this last year, that the Boy Scouts was settling 95,000 abuse claims, and we're at risk of running out of cash. 95,000. And that is because we have people who are in position of power that know what grooming tactics are. So they will groom somebody and make them in a position that they're experiencing the sexual violence and afraid to report it to anybody. Another myth is that it was his fault. again, that it's his fault, because if you're a man, you're going to be able to defend yourself. Another one, sexual abuse is less harmful to males. A lot of times when thinking about sexual violence in women, women are usually given like a timeline of, okay, that's horrible, here's your healing timeline. And friends, family members, people will assign a timeline to somebody's healing for them. But trauma has no healing timeline. It's not like you go from A to B and you're just okay. And it's not only women that are given this message. Men are just like, hey, get over it. Get over it. Move on. Yes, it happened, but like it's in the past, so you have to move forward now. You're a man. You shouldn't be having all of these emotions in relation to this. And so all of those factors combined are really harmful towards males. Another myth is that only gay men sexually abuse. This is just absolutely an atrocious myth and completely out of line. Men of tons of different sexual orientations can all abuse. Right? Anyone, any gender identity, any sexual orientation is capable of abuse. Another myth is being a male survivor means you are gay. So this plays into this idea that you could have protected yourself if you didn't like it, and since you didn't, you really must have wanted it. And that is extremely victim blaming. And sexual orientation has nothing to do with somebody experiencing sexual violence. So that in general just needs to be thrown out in the trash. And then this next myth, males abused by females got lucky. So if someone is given sexual attention by a woman, a lot of men are given the message by adult influencers growing up, if you're ever getting any female attention, you should want it. And we need to not ever should on someone and say you should want this. A man has every right to his body and should be able to make whatever decisions he wants to with his body and be able to set boundaries if that is what is wanted. And that should always be respected. And this happens a lot in the service industry, I have to say. So male bartenders, male servers, just any men within the service industry, if they're getting attention from a female and they don't want it, but they're the customer, there's still this mindset in a lot of places, well, the customer's always right, or they're our customers, so don't do anything to upset them or make them not come back to our business. And that is often at the expense of the comfort of staff, the employees at that service industry, restaurant, whatever it is. That's not okay. We need leaders in management who are going to say, I don't want that person as a customer if they're going to sexually harass my employees. And then finally, another myth, male survivors will abuse others. This is just not true. And survivors, when someone experiences sexual violence, that does not put them in a position that they then are going to perpetrate themselves. Absolutely not. So these are all myths, and I just wanted to address that. Okay. I had a video. It is not working right now. So I will say that I highly suggest this TED Talk video by Tony Porter, going over essentially that when he was younger, he was put into a room with a girl and they had a line of people just waiting to essentially, you know, in their mind at that age, have sex with this woman, but they weren't having sex with her. They were sexually assaulting her because they just had a line, they had the power. And it was just, he talks about being really scared to tell the other men around him, like, that's not what he wanted to do, that he had never had sex before. Like, they were just giving him a lot of pressure. And it was just very much so toxic masculinity of, well, if you're a man, sexual conquest is important to you, you have this opportunity, you should want it. And this narrow definition made him extremely uncomfortable, but it was really scary. It was scary to stand up and say, that's not what I feel comfortable doing. And so it's just a really good example of the importance of acknowledging what messages we're giving to men at such a young age and breaking that down. So, sorry, I needed a drink. So, really, this narrow definition of what it means to be a man is part of rape culture. And rape culture is a setting in which rape is pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender and sexuality. Earlier, when I talked about the statistics of sexual violence in men, we also have to be assuming that those statistics are extremely underreported. Right? Sexual assault, sexual violence in general is extremely underreported because there's still a stigma around it. And when we see the criminal justice system only be able to hold few people accountable, few rapists ever spend a day in jail, it can be off-putting for anyone to go through that process. So we have to be assuming that 1 in 6 or even 1 in 33 is very underreported, because men often experience more barriers to reporting than women because, again, when we're talking about sexual violence, people assume women as victims. So when a man calls a hotline, that can be a really hard step, because it's like, is this hotline for men? Or even when we think of the name of some agencies that do support men, it can still be really off-putting. Like, even for men experiencing sexual violence, it's like they seek out their resources. They see one of our amazing community partners, the Women's Center. When we're thinking about a man who needs support there, if a man comes into my office, I am able to tell him, absolutely, the Women's Center supports you. They do amazing work. I can make that connection. But if someone's just doing an internet search and they see the Women's Center, and that's the closest resource for them, but they're a man and they see that, they might be like, immediately, if they don't look into it, they might be like, oh, they only serve women, which is not true. But it happens, or people are like, oh, well, are rape crisis centers in general only for women? And they aren't, right? They are absolutely not. But it can just be so scary to come forward as a man when people historically have thought about this crime only against women. And our research has really focused specifically on women. It hasn't been until recently that we've really started collecting the research and the data on men experiencing sexual violence. And so rape culture, I have this pyramid on here. It's very normalized. And at the bottom, you will see that boys will be boys. That in itself is toxic masculinity. So boys will be boys often refers to, oh, like, if they're fighting, boys will be boys. If they're talking about sexual conquest of women, boys will be boys. This idea of locker room banter, and Trump referenced that when he was put on blast for talking about rape, or sexual assault, and that not being labeled that. So he said, when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything, grab them by the pussy. And he kind of just wrote that off and minimized that as, oh, well, that was locker room talk. Like, it was never meant to get out. That is not a locker that anyone should ever be a part of. That should not be locker room banter. And we need people to intervene if that is, because that is literally talking about sexual assault. And that is really what sexual violence comes down to. Again, that power and control. And that's exactly what he's saying here. When you're a star, when you have power, right? He's saying when you have power, when you have status, they let you do it. That is not true. It should always be with affirmative consent. And so these boys will be boys mentality, locker room banter mentality, that is really, really harmful. But it isn't harmful only to women. Again, it's harmful to anyone of any gender identity, including men. So there are men that are around when those comments are made, and those comments make them extremely uncomfortable too, to the extent that some men will leave sports or leave activities that they really enjoy because they don't want to be part of this bro culture or broing out and not having emotions and just talking about women as their objects. And it's important to realize that when someone falls outside of this man box that I referenced earlier, when someone falls outside of that, they do experience violent language that is to try to put them back in this man box. So even that term, I know it was used really commonly when I was in high school, which was a while back, but the term no homo, like two men would be expressing their like validation, their emotional connection with each other, or appreciation for their relationship. And then afterwards they would be like, oh, no homo. Well, one, that is homophobic, right? It's saying that there's, for any reason, problem with two men expressing emotions and affections towards each other. So that is homophobic. Two, that leads to emotional suppression, right? We need to normalize men talking about their emotions and validating their relationships. That is great qualities within a relationship to show appreciation for each other. And so by doing that, we're contributing to toxic masculinity. They also experience these other words. And I will say, all of these are really hard for me to say in the context of thinking that it's language used to put someone back into the man box, right? Because I know it contributes to a culture of toxic masculinity and rape culture. It's like when one man calls another man a pussy or a bitch, it's really degrading, right? It's degrading to women, it's degrading to the man. But thinking about why are they using that language and thinking about the history of the word bitch, the history of the word pussy, when we think about those things, it is really harmful to use that language and call somebody that. And then they feel like, okay, I can't be myself. And that's just not okay. And I put these here. So when students were asked, what is an ideal man? These are some examples of responses that students gave. And so you'll see the first one, an ideal man, reserved, don't talk about your emotions. You have to be strong emotionally and physically. If I have issues, I have something wrong, that's my problem, I have to deal with it. The second one, you have to be smart, but also hood or whatever you want to call it, combined with right and combine it right and you're the perfect black guy. So even this intersectional identity of not only is this person a man, but a black man. Ryan said the biggest single determining factor is assertiveness. If I am dominating other people, I am being masculine. Michael said stamina. You want to be able to say, dude, I fucked her for hours. Connor, age 21, you said you need to be athletic. You're at every party, but not partying too much. You're hooking up with multiple girls, but not every girl. You're smooth, you're social, and you've got game. So between these different definitions, you see themes of not talking about emotions, which means that you are strong if you don't talk about your emotions or acknowledge them. You see sexual conquest, talking about women as they are objects. And you see just dominating, having power and control over others. And all of those narrow definitions of what it means to be an ideal man are harmful, again, to men. Because when men don't meet this definition, they experience those violent words that we just talked about, or they talk to themselves like that. You know, they say, oh, because I'm feeling sad, I'm being a bitch or I'm being a pussy. That is not okay language to use when talking to ourselves. I remember at one point, I had a friend who was going through a lot of different things and he was having suicidal ideation. And a lot of that was in part of toxic masculinity, of the narrow definition of what it means to be a man. So he was just in a situation that he found himself out of a job. He had a girlfriend, but couldn't provide for her, couldn't give her what I guess she thought she deserved, or like he wasn't in a position to be a breadwinner. And even that rigid gender role of men make the money and provide in the relationship, because he couldn't do that, he was like, I am just not a man. He was like, if I can't take care of my girl, I'm not a man. And he was like, I just don't feel like I can live anymore without meeting the definition of what it means to be an ideal man. So he was having some severe suicidal ideation just because of this narrow definition of what it means to be a man. And so that obviously is violence, right? Suicide is violence towards oneself. But again, it's because of toxic masculinity, and that is so not okay. And I use this one friend's example, but this happens all the time. His example is not uncommon. I've heard other men talk about this as well, of when they are not meeting the definition of what it means to be a man, they are feeling just really bad about their own self-worth, and that's not okay. So kind of breaking down different components of toxic masculinity. So like those men said before on the previous slide, emotional suppression is what it means to be an ideal man. And it comes up all the time. So this is from, I have information on this slide from Peggy Orenstein's book, Boys and Sex. But preschool boys retain an understanding of feelings and desire close relationships. But midway through kindergarten, age 5 or 6, boys have learned to disconnect from feelings. They shun intimacy and become more hierarchical in behavior. So wanting to dominate others, which came up in a definition on the previous slide. By 14, boys think that others will lose respect for them if they talk about their feelings. So that's young to start needing to feel like you shouldn't talk about feelings with anybody. And research has shown that even girls who say they want someone to be more emotionally transparent are uncomfortable around men who talk openly about feelings. That I found really interesting, because I know I have been in relationships, I know friends have been in relationships where it's like they're constantly valuing and wanting emotional connection, but then when a man starts talking about his emotions, get uncomfortable and they're like, it's just too much, or perceiving him as not as much of a man because he's willing to do that and be vulnerable. And that I just find, again, is something that we need to change in our culture, because we do need to normalize not only women talking about emotions, but men as well. And boys learn to confide in nobody because it is weakness, because showing emotions is weakness. When they do confide, they mostly confide in females. And I always like to ask the question when I'm giving this presentation or a presentation around toxic masculinity, like, why do people think that? Why are they only comfortable confiding in females? And it is, again, it's because, well, if I show my emotions to another man, they're going to think less of me. They are going to think that I'm weak. They are going to think that they can't share things with me because it's going to make me cry or sad, and that's going to make them uncomfortable. We need to normalize talking about emotions. And anger is accepted over sadness. So if you look at an emotions like wheel where you can see a lot of different emotions, a lot of times when people are experiencing anger is because they are upset about something, or because they are sad about something that makes them angry. Maybe they are having to grieve something that makes them angry, even grieve the loss of a game. And it makes someone angry if they think that they should have won. But showing anger, punching a wall, slamming a ball down, just I'm trying to think of other different things I've seen, but anger is just accepted over sadness. So it's more accepted for a man to punch a wall if something has happened than to start bawling. If someone starts bawling again, they might experience someone say, oh, like, suck it up, man up, don't be a pussy, get over it. And again, experiencing violent language. And so crying is only acceptable situationally, and it's only acceptable in certain amounts. So it's like a few tears are okay, but if you're just like bawling, tears streaming down your face, for a girl, okay, but for a guy, not. And I will add to that that there's also like, okay, you lost a family member, acceptable to cry. You lost a game, not acceptable to cry. So again, very situational. We're very judgmental about when men cry. And another component of toxic masculinity is sexual conquest and entitlement. So sexual conquest is about power and dominance. It's not about sex, just as sexual violence is about power and control. And it's really like people trying to talk about women as objects or other people as objects because they are trying to bond with somebody. They're like, oh yeah, I did that girl, I slammed her. Like people are just trying to share things to normalize that they're heterosexual or just prove to someone that they're heterosexual. That is homophobic. That's not necessary. It's not okay. There is a difference between talking about sex and glorifying non-consensual contact or assault. I hate whenever I see in anything someone term something as non-consensual sex. That is rape. If someone is sharing like a nude picture of a girl that picture was sent to them in confidence with somebody else, just to be like, yeah, that's my girl, or that's a girl that I had sexual relation, or I got her to do this. That's absolutely not okay. It is horrible, and it's like you cannot do that. But it does happen as this way of trying to validate heterosexuality, and again, just completely not okay. And I thought that this was a really good graphic from the Men's Project. These are perceived societal expectations of young men. So 69% think society expects men to act strong, expects men to fight back when they're pushed, expects that they never will say no to sex, and expects that they'll use violence to get respect, right? Definitely have seen men at the bar of, you want to disrespect me, you want to go outside. And it's like just unnecessary. You can engage in positive conflict in a completely different way, or have a healthy conversation with somebody, a nonviolent conversation with someone to resolve conflict. But our society expects people to resort to violence, manly men to resort to violence. And so people will go to that to prove that they are not less of a man. And I would be remiss if I don't talk about porn when talking about toxic masculinity. So within Peggy Orenstein's book, Boys and Sex, Young Men on Hookups, Love, Porn, Consent, and Navigating the New Masculinity, there is a lot of conversations with these boys in this book around porn. And a lot of men have to turn to porn to learn about sex because their parents aren't having the conversations with them, or they want to have the conversation, but they don't want to do it until someone's like 17 or 18. Well, people are learning about sex at a young age. People have access to porn and usually start porn consumption around the age of 12 is what research shows. So people should definitely be having with their children in an age appropriate way about one, how to be safe, two, consent, because it's not just sexual, so consent conversations should be happening pretty early. They might not explicitly be labeled consent conversations, but just making sure that someone knows that they should have the right to their body at all times should be something that's addressed really early. And three, they should be having conversations about porn. So if someone's going to watch porn, we need to talk about what is normal, what is not normal. And the thing with porn is that porn in and of itself is not a problem. It is not a problem for people to watch porn. If that is what someone likes to do and enjoys doing that, absolutely. It will say that porn definitely needs to be paid for. But the problem with porn, it's not the porn itself, it's sexism within porn. So within porn, sex is portrayed as something that men do to women rather than with women. So this sexual conquest, right? Women don't really have as much of a say. It's really just they're there to please the man. Their orgasms are to please the man. And it's like they need to finish at the same time, or the man needs to be pleased first. So it's like all about the man, and the woman's just an object to make him happy. Porn is also associated with boys' real life badgering of girls for nude pictures, right? If you can see it in porn, then why can't I see your body, right? And that's not okay. It should always be consensual. Research has found associations between porn consumption and men's desire to engage in a range of aggressive behaviors, especially if they drink regularly before sex. And so I will say there is definitely a kink community. There is definitely people engage in violent behaviors when they are, or more aggressive behaviors when they are having sex. There is, again, nothing wrong with that as long as it's consensual. But what happens is when men are exposed to porn at a young age, or they don't have anyone that they're talking to about sex, then if what they're watching and the only thing that they're exposed to is like one form of porn, or it's choking, or it's slapping, if that's what they see as normal, then they're going to take that into their sexual relationships and maybe just start doing those things, even though it was never talked about or consented to, because they just think that that's normal. It's just, if you don't know anything else, then you just think that that's normal. And all those things should be consented to. Among male college students, porn has been correlated with seeing sex as purely physical experience, regarding girls as playthings and objects of conquest rather than people. So we hear like that term, oh, got another notch on the belt, or we've heard of people who literally keep tallies of the people that they're gonna have sex with, or people making a bet about how long it will take to have sex with somebody. All of those things are horrible and part of rape culture. And I find that this last bullet point is really interesting to me, that college students of both sexes who report recent porn consumption have repeatedly been found to be more likely than others to believe in victim blaming rape myths. So because we see more of a range of aggressive behaviors and sexism within porn, and we saw earlier on the sexual violence continuum that sexual violence is based in sexism, we start to see a lot more victim blaming right after somebody has consumed porn. This idea that, oh, well, she wanted that, because that is what is being shown in these videos. So with all this information, it's like, okay, like toxic masculinity sucks. So what can we do to break this bro culture? We need to be aware of how media influences our lives and our community's life, right? So I have this picture here. I absolutely loved this Vogue cover. I thought and still do think Harry Styles is amazing. And I also want to recognize that Harry Styles has power and privilege as a white man to be doing this and not experience violence. Our LGBTQ plus community, who explores a lot more gender expression, have been exploring gender expression like this for years. And so I just want to acknowledge that Harry Styles is not the first person to do something like this. I love that he brought attention to it. I love how he speaks up, and like gender expression is something that should be normalized, however someone wants to explore and whatever they want to wear. But I just want to take time to acknowledge that. But I loved this Vogue cover. And what we saw in response to this Vogue cover was like Candace Owens, she did a video about we need to bring back manly men. And so many people love that. And that is not okay. We need to, again, debunk this manly man myth and allow men to be men in whatever capacity that looks like for them. If you sit on a bench and you see people walk by, the people that you're assuming identify as men, which we make assumptions, right? We don't actually know. But the people that we see and assume identify as men, they are all shapes, sizes, wearing all kinds of different things. And all of these things should be celebrated. If someone is being their authentic self, they should be celebrated. We also need to provide sex positive education. We need to start having conversations about sex younger in an age appropriate way and about consent and the importance of not only you getting pleasure from sex, but your partner or partners as well. And so women are not seen as playthings. We need to help individuals break gender boxes and feel comfortable just being who they are. And use teachable moments with your social circles to help them understand what perpetuates violence. And then, of course, we have to vote and support policies and people that support dismantling toxic masculinity. So, even with local elections, federal elections, we have to be involved. If we are saying that we don't care about politics or aren't going to engage in politics because we can't make a difference, then we are not working to breaking our status quo, which normalizes toxic masculinity. And then finally, we need to be a conscious consumer and conscious content creator. So when we are creating content, we need to represent men in a lot of different ways. That way we can celebrate each way the man chooses to express himself. And we can show men having emotions, right? There needs to be more positive role models and examples of that so that men can feel more comfortable not having to emotionally suppress themselves. So that is today's presentation. And so today we talked about debunking the manly man myth. And men should just be celebrated in whatever way feels comfortable to them. And we just need to start really ending gender socialization. We need to end what our expectations are for when someone is born with a penis. Bottom line, we just have to really break gender boxes. And doing that, we are not only benefiting women in our culture, we are also benefiting men. And it's important to realize that men do benefit from this because when we have such narrow ideas of what it means to be a man, it just puts so many expectations that people have to wear a mask, like men have to wear a mask and feel like they're acting a certain way to be accepted. And that's not okay. And so we all deserve to live in a nonviolent culture, and that includes men as well. So I really appreciate y'all taking the time to tune in today. This is my contact information. If you have any presentation requests, topics that you want to talk about, I'm happy to do that. If y'all ever need anything, any support, please know that I am here for you. I'm in Ransom Hall 301 or can be reached to set up an appointment over Teams or on the phone. But just know that our office is here not only for the women on our campus, we are here for the men. We are here for gender nonconforming people. We're here for all of it, the whole gender spectrum. So please know that every single person is impacted, whether directly or indirectly, by relational and sexual violence. And so our services are here for all of our students. So we appreciate you. Take care of yourselves, and I will see y'all next week. We're getting to the end of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, but it is important to be raising awareness all year long. So thank y'all so much, and we'll talk to you later.